Hello everyone, this is update for April 24, 2024, day 791 of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for April 23 and April 22. I'm gonna discuss general military related item, not sort of political or economical, the way I usually start, and then I'm gonna switch to the situation on the battlefield. The reason I picked this guided gliding bomb because it's actually a perfect example of how this military help is frequently completely misguided and really waste of resource in many ways. So Ukraine, you probably heard, Ukraine is getting this payway for guided bombs. Basically, what it is just a regular bomb. The name is called MK82. This is their actual real bomb, and then you just have a kit that you turn this into guided gliding bomb. And so Ukraine got those from the UK, and but there are a lot of problems, and simply it's not competitive relative to the Russian bombs, which is, as you can see here, it's FAB 500 with also kit, right? So Russian kit is much more primitive, but it kind of works. It's good enough. This one, as you can see, much more advanced, much more engineering, much more expensive. Yes, it's more precise and everything, but for what it is, the types of targets, you really don't need that level of precision. So basically, this is overkill, too expensive, really a waste of resource. That's the biggest problem. This is just from economical perspective, from economical point of view. The key problem actually here is that the distance for this gliding bomb from the UK is only 30 kilometers versus Russian one has 70 to 80 kilometers. So it's more than two times advantage for the Russian bomb, and that's really huge advantage, and it's extremely critical on the battlefield. The reason for that is because assuming that this is going to be attached to F-16s, and even if not, even if it's a Su-24 or whatever it might be, for Ukrainian side, this really means that this is going to be kamikaze suicidal missions with this bomb. Because if we look at the S-300 Russian anti-air defense system, it has range, depending on obviously on missile, could be, but typically at least 70 to 80 kilometers, could be as far as 120, could be 150. So this aircraft are going to be easy target, and most of them are going to be one-way ticket when there will be attempt to attack Russian troops. So, and this can be compared to Russian one, where most of the anti-air defense system, Western ones, cannot get it, except for Patriot. But then everybody probably have seen what Ukrainian army tried to do. They brought the Patriot to the closer to battlefield, and then it was caught by Russian the air kamikaze drone systems, basically destroyed. So that didn't work out. So effectively, Russian aircraft can attack Ukrainian defensive lines from a safe distance. But in case of this bomb, this, as I stated, is going to be disaster in the making. If this happens, there's going to be suicidal flights essentially. And if they use with F-16, that really means that most of those F-16 are going to be knocked out pretty quickly, and it's going to be huge propaganda win for the Russian side, because there will be similar to what's going on right now with all of the Western armored equipment, all of this CV-90s, Leopard tanks, all of this Abrams tanks. They are being brought to Moscow as we speak to basically for a show, for propaganda show. which probably we'll see pretty soon. So this is, as I said, it is completely inadequate. In some ways, could be extremely disastrous piece of equipment. The other relatively minor problem with it that it only has roughly 90 kilograms of explosive, versus Russian one has 200, roughly 200 kilograms of explosive. So again, it's a 2 times advantage. So this, if I would look at this payway 4 and do like a market segmentation of how it's, where it could be used in effective way. There's essentially there's no way, there's nothing where it can be used effectively. It's basically useless. It has really negative value essentially, and that's you know that's unfortunate reality that probably not really thought about in Ukrainian military, where really there is very little thinking in general in the first place. But it could be, hopefully there should be some gatekeepers in the UK who really think about this. What's going to happen next with all of this? But again, this looks like going to be some kind of disaster in the making once they start being used. Now let's actually move to the situation on battlefield in Ukraine. As a general note, it looks like the morale of the Ukrainian army is really getting very low, and it's kind of like getting unglued in some ways. This is not sort of very visible to sort of outsider, but I think it's going to be becoming very, very clear in the coming months. And it's not driven by the lack of equipment as it's being presented by Ukrainian political top or elsewhere. It's really driven by the morale of the people on the ground, of the soldiers. They don't. There's no that the same level of motivation that Ukrainian forces had 2 years ago, or even a year ago. There is a huge drop in motivation, and it's being sort of felt on battlefield. And I will bring examples once we get to the relevant sections of the battlefield. So I'm gonna start walk through in a clockwise fashion, the way I always do, starting from very north. So the situation along the state border remains more or less the same. Nothing out of normal. There are rumors spread by, I would say, Russian side that the attack is imminent in from the northeast, basically direction of Kharkiv, and who knows, maybe Sumy. Basically, the same repetition of what Russia tried to do in February and March of 2022 and failed miserably. And this time, chances are better, but at the same time, it doesn't look like Russian side has enough troops to make it successful. So there is still extremely high risk undertaking for the Russian side, and probably unlikely to happen. Not at least at this moment. Now let's move to the situation on the North Luhansk section of the front line. Things here are more or less quiet. Some pressure around this Terne, around this area where that's being defended by the 12th Brigade, which is Azov. But no major advances. Things kind of more or less the same here. And as I mentioned before, this is strategic dead end for both sides here. So there is not much of application of resources by Russian side. Now let's move to the North Donbass front line. The northern sector is back more to sort of normal, quieter state. Apparently, Russian command abandoned the idea of capturing Siversk and probably pulling resources down south. So I will talk once we get there. Then there are some pressure west of and southwest of Bakhmut, but nothing truly sort of phenomenal so far. Ukrainian troops are holding the line. It's probably not for long, but no major advances by Russian troops here so far. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line. This is where things are really getting from bad to worse, and this is where I'm stating that Ukrainian army is becoming unglued. This is at very early stage. It doesn't mean that that's it, disaster and everything. But there are very serious signs of very big problems coming. So the reason I'm saying this is I mentioned this breakthrough towards Ocheretyne, where essentially uh, units of Ukrainian army brigade retreated, opened the hole for Russian troops, which uh, it's kind of like a narrow corridor that they managed to get through, and they captured this village Ocheretyne. So this I mentioned that simply that brigade retreated, leaving exposed flanks for its neighbors and so on. And uh, so what happened next? It's kind of like a narrow corridor, right, to this village Ocheretyne. It sort of goes along the railroad lines, and this was excellent opportunity to actually cut, and it's very narrow, probably I don't know 500 meters, maybe up to not more than a kilometer. Let's put this way, in width. So it could be easily, and it's very long. It could be easily cut off, and you could have mini encirclement of Russian troops in this village of Ocheretyne, and so on. So that was a perfect opportunity, perfect situation. Uh, the things are so bad on the Ukrainian side that Ukrainian army, Ukrainian command could not even try to seize on this opportunity. So basically, there's not enough of um, troops capable of basically attacking, so even if it's sort of peasants attack. But in this case, it would work out. But simply, there's not enough troops of that quality. So the most of them are basically very limited quality in terms of just being able to hold the line for some time, not too long, as we can see was in this case of Ocheretyne. So then things kind of like got even sort of worse. Basically, Russian troops started to expanding this corridor because they also realize it's dangerous. They could be cut off, and there is a tiny village southeast of Ocheretyne called Novobakhmutivka. There's tons of this Novobakhmutivka. You can see there is Novobakhmutivka here, but actually it's right next to this Ocheretyne southeast, and Russian troops basically then turned south and easily captured that entire village. This would not be happening, let's say, a year ago, like that. But essentially, almost like Russian troops are moving almost like without constraint to extent. I'm not saying it's totally like that, but it's very close to that situation, and that's what this only can be happening if the motivation of of Ukrainian troops is simply not there, and they simply retreat at the slightest risk. There is simply no desire to hold the line and to fight in a meaningful way. So what's going to happen here? It's obviously doesn't look good, doesn't look great going forward. There is obviously will take some time for Russian troops because they need to sort of basically expand this corridor, make it much wider, make it sort of permanent, basically, where they can protect their flanks, and then they probably will continue their movement. So there will be some kind of like call it a digestion period for some time, probably for another 4 or 5 days, maybe a week, and then they will continue sort of jump from there. In other areas here, the line is holding more or less. The other situation where things are also unraveling in very similar way, I call them unglued, is in this west of Marinka and northwest of Marinka. There is this town Krasnogorivka. So basically, Russian troops essentially captured most of the town, so that the Ukrainian troops are basically on the uh, northern edge and the western edge of the town. And again, this happened essentially in I don't know, like 3 4 days. Usually in the past, it would take months for Russian troops to capture a place like that. At this point, as you can see, things really starting to move fast and unfortunately in negative direction for Ukrainian forces. But again, as I mentioned before, the situation that's happening on with Ukrainian troops, whose motivation is really driven by the political situation in Ukraine, where absolute corruption leads to loss of motivation by the regular soldiers, and that's basically, if I were to sort of make it very primitive, this whole relationship, it's obviously much more complex. But if I overly primitivize it, that's really the essence of it. And people feel like that they are disempowered, and effectively the country is controlled by the group of people who where the most of the population feels like that's not their country anymore. And so they obviously, if people don't feel like it's theirs, they're not going to defend it. It's very simple psychology that works in the war. And not understanding that psychology is could cost the war and independence of Ukraine. Also, in a process, Russian troops captured this town Novomykhaylivka that I was mentioning, that they were going through for quite a while. So as you can see, there's a huge difference. Even with this Novomykhaylivka, it took Russian troops probably months and a half or 2 months, maybe even three, to capture it. Versus here, it really happened in probably less than a week, 4 or 5 days since the beginning till essentially loss. It's not complete loss, but it's quite there for Ukrainian side. Now let's move to situation on the Zaporizhya front line. Things here are more or less quiet. No large scale activity on either side here. Now let's finish with the Dnipro river, the front line along the Dnipro. Things here also remain the same. No essential activity here. Ukrainian troops continue maintaining bridgehead, which at this point is essentially irrelevant and useless in some ways. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye bye.